Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Podcast Host Revealed. I'm very fortunate in this episode to be joined by award winning podcast host and producer, Christine Mwaturura. Christine, how are you?
Hey, Andrew, how are you? Thank you so
Good.
much for inviting me on.
Thanks so much for coming on. Sorry I butchered your last name, but maybe by the end of the show I've got it. I was at the Australian Podcast Awards at the end of 2021, where your fantastic fiction podcast, Private Affairs, won, Podcast of the Year and Best Fiction Podcast of the Year. Can you just take me into your feelings on the night when you received those awards?
Yeah, so I was really shocked. I don't know if you could tell, especially for Podcast of the Year, being a fiction podcast and also being a romance fiction podcast and an independent producer at that, up against some really stiff competition. So I was really surprised that we won Podcast of the Year, but of course, really thrilled that we won as well. I think it's a big testament to all the work that's been going on, especially in the audio drama community. Here in Australia, we have a pretty solid community as well. So yeah, so I think it's a really good way to showcase that, yeah, there is an audio drama renaissance going on, and we're here, we're making things, and people are enjoying them.
Yeah, congratulations. So fantastic to see an independent producer getting the accolades. Tell me, you said you were quite shocked on the night, but then how have you sort of reflected on it and how has it sort of sunk in, being given such significant recognition?
I think I'm still kind of soaking it in a little bit. I think from time to time I revisit some of the pictures from the night, and I'm like, wow, like we really did that. It's amazing that something that is like a small, um, idea in my mind was realized and recognized at that level. So I think I'm still in that phase of still soaking it in, but yeah, I was pretty happy with the result. I still am. I'm really proud of the team as well. Putting together that team, and everything just came together so well, from the performances, the sound design, the music, everything just really worked out really well. It was a huge, how can I say, it was a huge uh, leap of faith as well in my ability, because prior to Private Affairs, I hadn't done an audio drama before, a production of this scale and technical difficulties. So, yeah, so I feel like I've really grown a lot. And I feel like I've also matured quite a bit as well since releasing the podcast and going through all of the other activities like marketing, promotion, and yeah, meeting some really cool people as well.
Well, what a great result. I mean, you put all that work in, you pushed yourself, and then you received such a great award. Tell me, have there been any sort of tangible benefits since winning the award? I know you're looking for sponsorship for season two. I mean, has there been interest around Private Affairs? Have you had bigger podcast producers reaching out to work with you?
Yeah, so I think one of the most, I suppose, obvious benefits was seeing a huge spike in listenership, particularly in Australia. So, interesting fact: prior to winning, our biggest listenership came from the UK, actually. So, since winning and being featured on Apple Podcasts, for example, and as well as some of the press releases that went out, it's really helped to get the name of the podcast out there, which is really, that's half the battle. Like, there are so many podcasts, and getting seen is still one of the more challenging things, especially for smaller independent producers. So that's definitely been one of the biggest benefits. I've also recently joined the ACOS Creator Network. So yeah, that's we're going to see how that partnership, well, it's not really a partnership, but how that arrangement works for us. I'm really optimistic that it's going to be a really great collaboration with them. Especially since I've seen recently that they're also developing their own like growth part of the business. specifically looking at growing audiences for their podcasts. So yeah, so that's really the focus right now, is growing the audiences and as well as fundraising for season 2.
And where can people support the show if they want to donate to season 2?
Yeah, so people can donate through the website, privateaffairspod.com. Just click on donate there. It's a PayPal link. So, yeah, it's super easy. Donate whatever you can. No amount is too small. So, yeah, and thank you to everyone who's donated so far.
Now let's talk about this fantastic show, Private Affairs. How would you describe the podcast to people who haven't heard it?
I think the easiest way for me to describe it is that it's television for your ears. So for people who are not familiar with audio dramas and what some audio dramas sound like these days, it's TV for your ears. It's a romantic dramedy fiction podcast. So yeah, so it's fictionalized, but it's inspired by true events from my life, particularly my dating life. So it's about a Melbourne couple who are in an interracial and intercultural relationship, and they are trying to navigate and learn how to move forward in their relationship when they come from very different backgrounds and perspectives.
Yeah, perfect description. Why did you start the show? What was the motivation to do this style of show as opposed to, say, I know you did a podcast before with your sister. What was the change into audio drama all about?
I wish I had like a very like solid answer to that. I think it was just a intuition. Well, first of all, my sister's the one who suggested it. So in at the end of 2017, 2018, there was a network that had a podcast contest going on, and they were looking for podcast ideas. I didn't have any ideas at that time, but my sister said, "Why don't you adapt your blog?" So that's sort of the backstory as well of the story in the podcast. Is I used to write a blog back in 2014 about my dating escapades in Melbourne. So my
Mm.
sister suggested that I adapt that into a podcast, and I was like, no one wants to listen to that, but I had no other ideas. So I made a very quick, rough draft pilot, and I thought to myself, you know what, this isn't too bad. Yeah, there's something in this. So it just continued to iterate and evolve from there to get to the stage where I was getting a lot more exposure now, listening to audio dramas and just seeing what was out there. And yeah, thinking to myself, wow, we could make something that's really cool from this. Mm.
Well, you certainly did. Why then did you decide to go for, say, fiction over more a non-fiction, I guess, account of your experiences dating? Why did you go to a fiction format?
First of all, my life is not that interesting. So,
Made
uh,
the writing easier.
yeah. So, okay. Well, actually, I think I've had what I consider to be interesting experiences, but they weren't all from that, I suppose, inciting um, situation with that person. But so I thought it would be interesting to fictionalize some of what happened, stemming from that situation, but adding some of these other experiences that I'd had as well and creating one story from it. So it's a way of, for me, it was a way of tackling some topics that I wanted to put out there for people to have conversations with, which is why I couldn't stick to like the actual facts of what happened throughout the whole story because, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think it would
makes
have been
sense.
as interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess how when you sort of think about the finished product, did it turn out the way you'd sort of originally envisaged it when you started writing and moving into the production? Did it turn out the way you wanted?
Um, I'll say no. So it's not exactly what I had in my head, what we ended up with, but I think in some cases that was even better. Um, and I'll give an example of that. For example, the character Mati, who is the protagonist's cousin in the story. So initially, when I had written that character, she sounded a little bit different to what we heard in the final. Um, and the reason why it changed is because when I met Tsungirai Chenuka, who played Mati, there was just something about her personality, her natural personality that I really liked. She has almost like a dry sense of humor, which I thought, you know what, that would be really interesting to inject into this character. So I did actually go back and change some of the lines for Mati to make her a little bit more dry. So yeah, so it definitely changed as well. And um, going into production, the way I like to direct is, go through the script, what is exactly in the script once, or twice. And then I also like to have the actors improvise. So through that process of improvisation, um, the actors brought their own interpretations of the scenes and the characters, so it was different than what I had imagined, but in a good way.
Yeah, right. I got the feeling when I was listening to it that you were sort of eavesdropping on a date or something. It felt like I was, just a fly on the wall while these two people went through this dating experience. Is that the sort of effect you were trying to give?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I wanted, part of the reason why the show is called Private Affairs is because I want to give people a peek into people's private lives, So that was definitely the intention of creating
I,
that, as well as like with Veronica V, the protagonist. I also wanted to give some insight into her internal world and how she is processing some of these things that are happening to her.
Yeah, I found it really captivating, that sort of fly on the wall feeling. I mean, it sort of feeds the sort of voyeuristic side of human nature, and I think there's a real, you've stumbled upon a really great form of fiction that I think really brings people in because you feel like you shouldn't be there almost.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's definitely what we were going for.
Good. So, you said aspects of your real life were used to write the script. What was it like then seeing, parts of your real dating life recreated?
Yeah, it was uncomfortable in some cases. Especially like, reading social media comments.
Mhm.
And, people say like, "Why would V do that? That's not a smart thing to do," and I'm like, "What? Is it that bad?" Or, um, people thinking, well, I found it really interesting that some people, painted Luke, who is the love interest, as a villain, which was really interesting to me because I didn't set out to write him as a villain, he was just a person to me. Um, so yeah, so that was quite interesting. And in production as well, it was a little bit, there were some scenes where it was like, okay, this is hitting a little too close to home. Let's take a break and reconvene around the scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to give too many of the plot points away because I'm hoping a lot of our listeners will go and listen to Private Affairs in full. But I must admit, I found Luke quite an unlikable character. There was just something about him I didn't like. I don't know what it is. I hope if there's a season two, he like dies in a car accident or something.
That's so funny. Okay, all right. I'll take your notes. I'm actually, yeah, I'm about to start writing season 2. So
Yeah,
it's
I
so
mean,
funny to me. Yeah, like cuz I
but I
did
guess
not
that's
think.
important, isn't it? That he engendered that character, an emotional response in me, and I'm not a female in the dating world, so I can imagine if you're a female in the dating world and you come across people like this, the emotions that triggered by listening to the podcast would be even greater.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think uh, judging from some of the reviews, some people are like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so triggered. This is so relatable. Do we have the same experiences?" So, yeah, I definitely think there is something to that. But yeah, it's just interesting to me because when I wrote the story, I didn't really see him that way. But I also think that as a writer, you also kind of have to be compassionate and empathetic, um, towards all your characters. So I think I see him differently than someone who's looking at it from a distance.
Mm. Maybe we'll see more growth out of Luke in season 2, and I won't hate him so much. What about then, you know, the way producing Private Affairs has actually made you reflect on yourself and the decisions you've made in your real life? How has that sort of helped you develop?
Do you mean like the actual production of it
Well,
or
I
like
mean,
the
like when you
story
go
of
in
it?
and start writing about your real life experiences and you make the podcast, has it made you look back on your real experiences a little differently?
I wouldn't say differently. Like if I compare some of the things that I wrote in the blog, I think I still feel the same way about um, a lot of things. Um, but I think it's helped me connect the dots a little bit more. Um, yeah, I think when you're writing, especially when you are writing stories that are based in reality, and I do a lot of like mining of my own life, it's forced me, especially now also going into season 2 and thinking about some of the things that could happen, it's making me think about even going back to, like, my childhood and
Wow.
connecting the dots, to really understand the intentions of the character. And sometimes, like, even with a character like Taff, who also was not very popular with some people. But I feel like I have a lot of empathy for him again because part of my own story is infused in him, well, his backstory, which we didn't get into in season 1, but contextually, I understand that. Um, yeah. So I suppose, yeah, it's helped me sort of connect the dots as to things that happen to you and how they can impact on things that are happening to you now if you haven't really processed those.
That's really interesting. I mean, this podcast is primarily about how producing a podcast can affect a host, and you're in a unique position where you're writing a fiction story, but you're really trawling through personal experiences, and I'm sure some of them you're thinking, I actually don't really want to go through this again. So you're doing that to produce a great podcast.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the people that I look up to is Michaela Cole. She wrote "I May Destroy You," the limited TV series, which is excellent. And when she was receiving one of her awards for that show, she said to all the writers, "Write the story that scares you." I'm not there yet. I think I know a little bit about what that story is, but I think I'm slowly building up my, I guess, tolerance or bravery to be able to get to that stage where I actually tackle the really difficult things.
Mm. Well, one of my philosophies at Piccolo Podcast is being fearless, and I think what you've done so far is fearless creativity, and I hope it continues. I hope we see a lot more of that really tough stuff, because I think the rewards you get back if you do go there are quite really large. You get big rewards when you take those risks.
Yeah, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? So
Mm.
yeah. And it
What
it
what about
also
what about you go on?
yeah, no, I was also gonna say like it makes life a little bit more like when I'm going through difficult times, it makes it a little bit more like, "Oh, okay, let me remember how this feels. This might come in handy, down
Mm.
the line, you know. So let me just journal about it, which is also very cathartic. Um, but it really does then help like later on because I do have a journal that I refer back to when writing. Like, oh yeah, that's how that felt. This is probably how this character feels in this moment. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. What about your friends and family? What have they thought of the show since it's come out? Because obviously your friends would be like, oh, they'd know some of the real stories. What's that process been like?
Yeah, like it's been quite funny because my cousins, like when the first or the second episode dropped, they're like, "Oh my gosh, so and so is Mati, so and so," and I'm like, "Mati is none of you guys." But they were all. I was trying to explain to them, Mati is all of us. We are all her, you know. But they think they know who it is. But I'm like, no, she's not any one person. Um, yeah, and it's quite funny because some of my friends thought that it was nonfiction. I'm like, it clearly says fiction podcast. It's in the fiction category. So I don't know how they got lost in that description, but yeah, so that's been quite interesting. Some family members I haven't told about just because culturally where I come from, we come from a, I would say, more conservative place. So some of the content I don't think would be looked on favorably, especially
Yeah,
by
like the sex
family.
the sex scenes and stuff.
Yeah, the sex scenes. And it's also just uncomfortable, to know that like certain family members like know that this came from me. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, some of them are in the dark about the whole thing. Yeah.
Hopefully they don't stumble across it on the internet sometime.
Well, I'm sure they will at some point, but I'm not going to be the one to tell them about it or send them the link. No.
Good. Any former flames or any former, people that you dated reached out since it's come out?
No, no, I'd say no. But interestingly, I do have, or I have had quite a number of guys reach out to me, people whom I haven't dated, but just men in general. Um, and yeah, they've been very open about their own experiences. And it's really quite interesting to me because I'm like, oh, men do have feelings. You obviously. But
We do.
you know
We have some.
yeah, but I'm like, wow, they're expressing to me.
Yeah.
I think that's the surprising thing, especially since I'm just a person on the internet. So yeah, maybe that makes it
It,
easier.
I mean, there is quite a power that podcasting has. When it connects with people, you can get a lot back. And you say, people have been reaching about their personal experiences. You don't get that from other mediums. There's something about podcasting where can really connect with people's issues, and they want to talk with the host or the producer or the writer in your case. And for me, I find that a really rewarding part of the experience because so many times you don't get feedback.
Yes, yes. I think you nailed it on the head right there. It's such an intimate medium. You're right in people's ears. It's not like, something like going to the movies and watching it with a bunch of people. You're having your own experience of the podcast, which I think is really cool.
Mm. And have you? How do you? Constant theme on this show is how people handle criticism or negative feedback about the show. Did you receive any sort of criticism, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so I think some of the criticism, um, I think is it's worthwhile looking into people's criticism. That's what I think, but you don't have to accept it as fact. It can just be someone's perspective, and I think what I try to keep in mind is that when I'm writing, I'm thinking of a particular person that I'm writing for. So there might be some things that if you're not part of that demographic, you might not get it. And that's okay. Um, I'm willing to accept that, that some people might just, it might be just over their head and they're not understanding the nuances, which is fine. So I try not to take it personally. Although I do have to take some things personally. Like there was one review, the person gave us 1 star. I'm like, 1 star? Like, even like take the story out, whatever, just like the sound design alone. And I think the music, at least that gets us 2 stars, you know? So I
Absolutely.
was quite offended by that one, but you move on. And some things are quite helpful. Like, I think one person said, they commented, so there had just been like one episode released, and the person said, "Is that it?" And yeah, they left a negative review. So I was like, "Oh, okay, you kind of have to be a little bit more explicit in like saying this is episode 1 of 6." You know, like this is not the end of the story. It doesn't end here. You know, so I think I could have been better with my messaging around um how many episodes they're going to be, because that was also another question people were sending me, like, how many episodes on this season? So that's something that I know going forward is like, okay, people want to know how many episodes they can expect in the season. Yeah.
It was a very bingeable show, so I empathize with that person. I just wanted to listen to episode after episode after episode. So, it's
Yeah,
excellently
it's too
produced.
bad. Hopefully they went back and you check the feed, and then they're
I
like,
hope
oh,
so.
there are more episodes. I don't know.
I
Probably
hope so.
not.
People can be silly. That's one thing I've learned in multiple businesses. What about working with a team? So, you had actors, you had a sound designer. What was, I guess, the greatest challenge about, getting the actors to depict the story the way you wanted?
The greatest challenge. Hmm. I think because this was my first time directing, so I think I made, well, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but I think there's certain areas where I could have improved as a director. Um, I, and also because I'm wearing the hat of producer at the same time, which is challenging, and also recording engineer. so
Wow, a few
so there
hats.
were, yeah, there were like a lot of things that I was stressed about, which I think some of the actors could tell that I was stressed about it. So that kind of like transfers stress to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, so I think that's another thing that I have in mind is like when you're directing and working with actors, I think they want to feel like calm, and they want to feel like they have enough opportunities to get the scene right. So yeah, so that's something that I'll be working on going forward in season 2. So I'm hoping to not have to do the recording engineer task. But I will be directing it again, even though directing is not like my favorite thing to do, but I can't see who else I would get to direct it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would definitely do it season 2 because you've got all those lessons that you've learnt from season 1 and all that experience. So, yeah, I think you'll probably enjoy it more the second time.
Yeah, and I think I'm making more of a conscious effort to really study more about directing. So one of my things that I have planned is to actually take an acting class online so that I can understand how actors think, and then maybe
Good
that
luck with
way.
that. They
We'll
usually
see how
think
it
they
goes.
usually think about themselves. That's a pro tip. Um, Sorry to all the actors listening. Please come on the show again. But look, I know what you mean though. When you get in those rooms with actors and the lights are on, and there is a certain pressure, and it's up the director to set the tone. I think
Yeah.
that's my sort of thoughts around that.
Yeah. It's unfortunate though that like a lot of the directing resources that I looked at before directing season 1, it's a lot of like fluffy, like it's really hard to know exactly like how to direct. There isn't like an ABC. This is
Mm,
how you do it. It's not a very methodical thing. Um, just from like my observation of interviews of directors, I'm like, okay, but so I suppose the lesson in that is that it's it's just about working with people and almost being like a manager, because I also came from the corporate environment. So it's like, as a manager, how do you inspire your team to do their best work and provide that environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every director has to find their own method, and a lot of positive reinforcement and stuff like that. So I think you're getting there. I can't wait to see and hear, and more importantly, hear season 2. Um, Look, we end every interview with one question, and I've got a fair idea what yours is going to be, but I'll ask it anyway. What's your favorite memory related to making the Private Affairs podcast?
There's so many.
Well,
There's so
name a
many.
few. Give me a few, Christine.
Um, when I finished the script, that was a huge thing, and, I printed it out, and I saw the stack of papers, and it was done. I was so happy. That was definitely a huge milestone. Um, and yeah, the music supervision, I also come from the music world, so I'm a radio DJ on community radio, so I
DJ
just
Kicks. DJ
yeah.
Kicks.
Yeah, PBS 106.7. So yeah, so the music supervision was so much fun working with Jerry. He totally nailed it. I remember receiving some of the demos and just being like, "Oh my gosh!" Like my notes back to him were all like, "Fantastic, obsessed," you know. So really not useful feedback, but it's just like, "Yes, I like it."
That's
Um,
good. Did a good
yeah,
job.
he did an excellent job. And receiving the first draft of the first episode back from Jerry, the sound designer, that was also a moment. Got really emotional because, up until then, you have the performances and everything, and it sounds. I'm like, okay, like the performances are strong. I'm feeling confident with that. This was my first time working with Jerry, so I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, but he executed beautifully, and yeah, he just brought it to life. So I would say those are some of the key moments for me. And also
Yeah,
winning the awards.
of course.
Awards are nice. Definitely, I'm really grateful that that we won those awards. But I think people say commit to the process, not to the outcome. So I wasn't making the podcast to win podcast of the year. This was a story that I wanted to get out, and yeah, and I'd also say doing the after show episode was really great because that's where we also infused a lot of the listener feedback and comments into a discussion, which is really what I wanted, to come out of the podcast is discussions about certain topics.
Oh, fantastic. Well, congratulations on producing a wonderful show. That's a beautiful memory to hear you say how it touched you, basically getting the first episode that was the sort of, the finished product of your dream. So, congratulations on making it a reality. And I can't wait for season 2.
Thank you. Thank you so much.